Chapter 9. Father, no, please, I can't do this. Emily's voice trembled, and her words were barely more than a desperate stutter. The 17-year-old stood in her father's office, her hands clenched into fists as she struggled to hold back the rising tears. But Edward Hargrave, her father, showed no reaction. He sat behind his massive desk, engrossed in a file, barely acknowledging her presence. "Don't be so dramatic," he finally said in a bored tone without even looking up. "It's not like you're still a virgin, and you probably won't even have to go that far." Emily gasped, her eyes widening in shock. The cold cruelty of his words hit her like a slap. She spun on her heel and stormed out of the room, her anger and desperation boiling behind her like a brewing storm. The door slammed shut with a loud bang. "Edward, with all due respect," began Sean, an agent on Edward's team who had overheard the scene. He was 33 years old, tall, and usually exuded confidence, but now there was nervousness in his voice. "But Emily is right. You can't ask this of her. She's 17, almost still a child." At last, Edward lifted his gaze from the file, his icy blue eyes locking onto Sean with a calmness that was more terrifying than any rage. "And she's part of this team, Sean, part of my plan. I've been training her for years, preparing her. She's exceptional, and you know that." Sean bit his lip, trying a different approach. "Setting aside the moral aspect, how do you plan to justify this officially? What happens if—" "I don't," Edward interrupted sharply. He closed the file in front of him and leaned back, exuding absolute control. "Emily doesn't exist in any official records. She only exists in the depths of my resume as my daughter. No one outside this team knows she's operational, and it's going to stay that way." Edward let a meaningful pause hang in the air before continuing. "She will complete this assignment. She survived far more dangerous missions. This time, she just has to go to a nightclub. That shouldn't be too much for her. If this is a problem for you, tell me now. I need my team to be 100% behind me." Sean felt uneasy. Everything in him screamed to oppose Edward's words, but he knew his boss didn't tolerate compromise. The job was important, not just for him, but for his pregnant fiancée, Adele. He needed the money. Reluctantly, he lowered his head. "That won't be necessary, sir," he murmured. Edward nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then take care of our new recruit. Clyde Easter should be arriving any moment now." Think term. Clyde Easter followed Sean through the estate, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished wooden floors. Everything about this house reeked of wealth. It was old, English, radiating an air of grandeur reinforced by intricate wood paneling, heavy velvet curtains, and antique furnishings. The massive chandelier in the entrance hall alone was probably worth a lifetime salary for the average agent. Sean led Clyde confidently through various wings of the house, showing him the offices, the training room, and the living quarters. Although Sean appeared calm and professional, Clyde noticed the subtle signs of tension, the slightly clenched fists, the tight jaw, the occasional nervous clearing of his throat. As they entered the large kitchen, Sean opened his mouth to say something, but abruptly stopped. Clyde followed his gaze and saw Emily. She was sitting on the kitchen counter, her posture relaxed, but her eyes were cold and scrutinizing. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat beside her, and she held a cigarette in her hand, which she had just stubbed out with the fingers of her other hand. The smoke curled lazily into the air, mixing with the ever-present scent of old wood and leather that seemed to permeate the entire house. "Allow me to introduce," Sean said after a brief pause, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "Miss Emily, Mr. Hargrave's daughter." Clyde stepped forward, his demeanor composed and collected. He gave no indication of surprise, instead extending his hand toward Emily with a polite smile. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Hargrave. I'm Clyde Easter." Emily examined him briefly before flicking her cigarette into her empty glass. Prentice, she corrected coolly. My parents are divorced, but you can call me Emily. After a short pause, she added in a mocking tone, or the house whore? Oh, sorry, that would be too vulgar for my father. His words would probably be the in-house prostitute. Clyde remained unfazed. His smile stayed polite, his voice calm. I think I'll stick with Emily. Emily held his gaze for a moment, her eyes flickering as if she had expected a different reaction. Finally, she slid off the counter, offering Clyde a saccharine yet unreadable smile. You might actually be interesting, she said quietly before shooting Sean a sharp look. I'll be in my room. The two men watched her leave in silence until she disappeared from view. Sean exhaled softly, grabbed the whiskey bottle from the counter, and returned it to the pantry as if it were a routine task. Then he reached for the glass where Emily had stubbed out her cigarette and rinsed it in the sink. Clyde observed him, his thoughts cool and calculating. Do you do this often? Clyde finally asked, his voice calm but carrying a hint of amusement. The scene was too absurd. Sean gave him a quick glance as he wiped down the sink. What do you mean? Cleaning up after a spoiled brat? Clyde leaned against the counter, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed. That's not exactly what I see myself doing here. Sean let out a quiet snort, shook his head, and opened a window. The cold English air drifted in, slowly dispersing the acrid smoke. Emily is complicated, he said after a brief pause, but she has her reasons. Complicated? Clyde raised an eyebrow, his tone still steady. Interesting choice of words. Sean closed the window halfway, leaving just enough open to let the air circulate. Don't let her act fool you. She's sharper than she lets on, and more loyal than most people here think. Clyde nodded slowly, but his thoughts remained cool. Loyalty was one thing, respect was another. He had no intention of playing the servant for someone like Emily. If she wanted to provoke him, she would be disappointed. He wasn't the kind of man easily rattled. Before Sean could add anything, the kitchen door swung open, and Edward Hargrave entered with his usual domineering presence. His gaze immediately landed on Clyde, and a pleased smile spread across his face. Mr. Easter, Edward called out loudly, stepping forward to shake his hand. It's a pleasure to see you again. The pleasure is mine, sir, Clyde replied in his usual professional tone, returning the firm handshake. Edward released his grip and took a quick look around the kitchen, as if ensuring everything was in order. I hope my daughter didn't scare you off, he asked casually, though there was a trace of mockery in his voice. Not at all, sir, Clyde answered with a calm smile. We had a brief conversation. Edward nodded in satisfaction before shifting his gaze to Sean. For his first assignment, Clyde will be working with Emily. Sean opened his mouth to respond, but Edward continued, his voice sharp as a blade. If that's a problem, Sean, we can settle it right now. Sean's jaw visibly tightened, but eventually he lowered his head. No, sir, he said curtly. Perfect, Edward said with a pleased nod, clapping Clyde on the shoulder. Welcome to the team. Clyde smiled politely while Sean shot him a brief, resigned glance. He knew he had stepped into a nest of tension, but it didn't bother him. He was here to do a job, and he would do it on his own terms. Actions